I appreciate everyone's ability and flexibility to do this meeting virtually, as we obviously had originally hoped to do it in person. Let me start out the meeting with our roll call, and then we'll keep moving through the agenda. Governor Borenstein.
Here.
Chair Campbell.
Here.
Member Decker.
Here.
Governor Edo.
Here.
Joe.
Here. Excuse me.
Thank you.
It's on mute.
That's okay. I understand. Governor Galitova.
Present.
Vice Chair Konzioka.
Here.
Chair Leslie.
Present.
Member Prescott.
Here.
Vice Chair Shorey.
Here.
And Member Wagner.
Here.
Thank you, governors and governing body members. We do have a quorum and we may proceed. Our first item on the agenda is, first let me turn it to our chairs for their welcoming remarks, and then we'll go to general public comment. So why don't we start with you, Chair Campbell.
Thank you, Roger. Welcome, everyone. And just briefly, I wanted to express my appreciation to the hosts of the EDAM Forum held in Las Vegas on August 30th. The California ISO, the Balancing Authority of Northern California, the Hometown Utility, NV Energy there in Las Vegas, Pacificor, and Southern California Edison. The day featured some very engaging discussions involving a wide range of stakeholders. And the forum was really the kind of open dialogue that's been foundational to market cooperation in West. So I wanted to share appreciation for everyone involved in putting that event on. Now I'll pass things over to the Board of Governors Chair, Mary Leslie.
Thank you. And I just want to join everybody virtually. We are 100% virtual today. This might be a first since our COVID years. And what an honor it is to be with the WEIM governing body, and that today's items all reflect our joint decision-making process that's been so successful for the EIM, and we're looking forward to it being equally successful on the EDAM and all the other subjects we have on here today. So with that, Roger.
Great, excellent. Thank you, Chair Campbell. Thank you, Chair Leslie. Next item we have on our agenda is general public comment, and this is for any public comment for items that are not specified on the agenda today. And operator, if you could check the lines as to whether we have any public comment.
Absolutely. As a reminder, ladies and gentlemen, to make a public comment, click the raise hand icon located at the bottom of your screen to place yourself in the queue. When it's your turn to speak, simply click the unmute button in the pop-up message that will appear on your screen. If you are joined via our phone line, press #2 to enter the comment queue. I do not see any raised hands at this time.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda, and let me note, if I'm moving kind of quick, we do have a very full schedule today, so we are seeking to be as efficient as possible. So next item on our agenda is the decision on the July 19th, 2023 joint general session minutes. And if I can have a motion to approve those minutes.
So moved.
Thank you, Angelina.
Second.
Thank you, John. And your votes is Governor Borenstein.
Aye.
Chair Campbell.
Aye.
Member Decker.
Aye.
Governor Edo.
Aye.
Governor Galitova.
Aye.
Vice Chair Konzioka.
Aye.
Chair Leslie.
Aye.
Member Prescott.
Aye.
Vice Chair Shorey.
Aye.
And Member Wagner.
Aye.
Thank you, governing body members and board members. The motion passes. The next item, let me turn it over to our CEO for agenda item number 3 for the CEO remarks.
Thanks, Roger, and Chair Leslie, Chair Campbell, members of the governing board, and the EIM governing body. It's wonderful to see all of you virtually, unfortunately, today, but I just wanted to offer a few remarks today. First of all, wanted to once again congratulate Governor Galitova for her confirmation for her 5th term on the CAISO Board of Governors. Angelina, congratulations. We're extremely pleased to be working with you again, and wonderful. And to Chair Campbell, great to see you in that role. And of course, certainly from Member Wagner, wonderful to have you on board here with us in that role in the EIM governing body. I noted that today there are a few more ties on for the meeting as normal, as we get, I think we're a day away from the end of summer. I know Severin is still holding out in a warm building here in California, but as we turn the corner on what's been another challenging summer for the West, I wanted just to acknowledge a deep appreciation for how well I think many of us across the Western energy community work together. The EIM, again, a key factor in reliability this summer, and just really appreciated the spirit of collaboration that we saw across the entire summer. Just personally wanted to note next Friday will be my 3rd anniversary at the CAISO. Hard to believe, the time is flying by. Couldn't have possibly picked a more wonderful group of people to work with, and just a super dynamic time for our industry. And as the energy imbalance market has been evolving, and of course now as we move into the frontier of the extended day-ahead market, of course, one of the key elements that's also evolved has been our governance, and the joint authority framework, I think, has been a really pivotal part of the evolution of relationships and evolution of shared decision making. And I wanted just to express my appreciation to all of you for the spirit of collaboration, coordination that's gone into making joint authority a success so far. And of course, today we have 3 decisional items for you to consider. The first being the decision on the rules of conduct enhancements, track 1. We're then going to turn to the decision on the 2024 through 2026 cost of service study, rate and fee changes, and then the decision on variable operations and maintenance cost review for 2023. So I'm looking forward to a good dynamic conversation, and hopefully ending up in a good place here after this conversation. So with that, thanks again for all the support, and I'll turn it back to Roger.
Thank you, Elliot. Agenda item number 4 is our decision on rules of conduct enhancements, track 1. And let me turn that over to Anna McKenna, Vice President, Market Design and Analysis, to introduce the topic.
Thank you, Roger. Good afternoon, Board of Governors, governing body members, colleagues, and members of the public. I'm happy today to introduce the proposed decision on rules of conduct enhancements, track 1. I did want to note that this is an important change, and wanted to thank the stakeholders who brought these issues up to us and engaged very actively in coming up with a good solution in this area. Jill Powers, our demand response and distributed energy sector manager, will be presenting the proposal. And with that, I will turn it over to Jill.
Thank you, Anna. Good afternoon, Chair Leslie, Chair Campbell, WEIM governing body members, and Board of Governors. As mentioned, my name is Jill Powers. I am a sector manager in our Market Policy Development Group, and I will be presenting to you proposed changes to limited aspects of the administration of the rules of conduct applicable under the current tariff as proposed in the Enhancements Track 1 initiative. We can go to the next slide. I am having a little bit of problems with my connection. There we go. The rules of conduct establish the guiding principles for participating in the ISO markets by establishing specific rules market participants must follow. It also outlines specific informational and timeline requirements and establishes penalties or sanctions for violation of these rules. One particular area under which rules of conduct apply is the requirement for market participants to ensure they are submitting settlement quality meter data accurately and timely. The submission of meter data is necessary to correctly settle the markets within their established timeline and those timeframes. Therefore, it is through the rules of conduct that penalties for missing, late, or inaccurate meter data submission is established. Management is proposing changes to the penalty structure for the submission of inaccurate meter data only. In addition, changes are proposed adding clarification to other procedures developed in the overall administration of the rules of conduct. We can go to the next slide. Are we on 3?
So, Jill, I'm not sure if you can see the presentation. It starts with today's inaccurate meter data.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Is that-
my connection keeps coming in and out. So I am on slide 3. The structure of the current rules of conduct penalties for submission of inaccurate meter data can apply a disproportionate dollar amount penalty compared to the magnitude of the meter data inaccuracy. To the extent that an entity does not submit accurate meter data by 52 business days after the trade date, and this inaccuracy is self-reported or ISO identified, the penalty applies, and the entity is subject to the application of this inaccurate meter data penalty. Today, the penalty amounts to $1,000 per trade date that the meter data issue is not resolved and remains inaccurate. These penalties can accrue quickly, as it may take time to resolve and research the inaccuracy, or even identify the inaccuracy in the first place. The $1,000 per trade date penalty accrues independent of the magnitude of the meter data size inaccuracy, such that a very small megawatt inaccuracy can lead to accrual of sizable penalties over time. Historically, to the extent of that magnitude of the penalty, to the extent it was significant, and depending upon the circumstances of the particular situation, the ISO has been willing to engage with the impacted parties and has pursued filings with FERC seeking a waiver of the application of these penalties that accrued under the terms of the tariff. More recently, a number of our stakeholders have requested and encouraged us to evaluate the meter data penalties design based on their experience with its application. Separately, FERC has also indicated the need for the ISO to reevaluate the application of the penalty policy in order to limit or avoid seeking waivers of the application of them. Next slide. Slide 4. Based on stakeholder requests and comments received from FERC, the ISO initiated a stakeholder process earlier this summer to promptly evaluate potential modifications to the application of the meter data penalties, in particular, these penalties applying to inaccurate meter data submissions. Stakeholders were engaged in multiple rounds of meetings and iterations of the proposal brought forward today. The proposal was developed to better align the magnitude of the penalty to the size of the inaccuracy and its overall market impact by adjusting the meter data penalty to one that is the lower of $1,000 per trading day, or 30% of the error's absolute value. This means that we will look at the size of the megawatt meter data inaccuracy and estimate its value based on the average LMP at the location for the particular inaccurate interval. And if that value is less than a penalty, applying a $1,000 per date penalty, the lower of the two will stand. This penalty structure reflects a more proportional application of the meter data error to the size of its market impact. Smaller meter data inaccuracies that have a smaller market impact effectively will be subject to a smaller and more proportional penalty compared to larger meter data inaccuracy. This lower of approach to the application of the penalty nevertheless continues to retain the incentive for entities to correctly submit the meter data that has been inaccurate and is with error. This proposal was widely supported by the market participants, and it will mitigate the need for seeking waivers at FERC for the application of these types of penalties. Next slide. Through the initiative, we also proposed some smaller enhancements or clarifications to other aspects of the rules of conduct procedures. These were also supported by stakeholders. The first one is the elimination of an annual penalty distribution filing with FERC. Under current tariff provisions, once penalties are collected, we annually seek FERC approval for the distribution of these penalties, which are distributed by the ratio of grid management charge payments by each scheduling coordinator, a methodology that's within our tariff. The FERC approval process may take several months to complete. So in lieu of the FERC filing, we propose to post an informational report on the ISO website showing the distribution of the penalty per that methodology, which we have included in the tariff, and promptly redistribute these on an annual basis, removing from the tariff the requirements to file this distribution with FERC. This ensures that funds are promptly distributed to market participants and reduces the administrative burden on the ISO of tracking these distributions through settlements for months pending FERC approval. The second clarification regards eligibility for penalty distribution. And the clarification is simply that entities that are exempt by tariff from penalties or receiving a waiver are not eligible to receive the proceeds from penalty distribution. This change was also widely supported by the stakeholders. And lastly, a clarification as to the application of market adjustments in limited cases where WEIM entity is the sole entity in a utility distribution company area is being proposed. For some context, when inaccurate meter data is not processed by the T+11-month settlement statement, we have to adjust its impact to the market manually. When the initial error was to the scheduling coordinator's benefit, for example, they over-reported generation or they under-reported load, the ISO manually calculates an adjustment that approximates the financial impact on the market, and then the market adjustment is charged to the entity that incurred the meter data error, and the market adjustment refund may go to that same entity. In some instances, that market adjustment charge and refund going to the same entity, as is the case for a WEIM entity that is the only entity within that area that is subject to the distribution. So in those instances, the proposal is to not charge the entity a market adjustments for its meter data error when its value is offset by the same entities through a refund. This change is being added and to address administrative burden and reduce the inefficiencies in applying a market adjustment in these very rare cases. Next slide. Stakeholders broadly supported the proposed enhancements through this summer stakeholder process, and this process consisted of 2 iterations of proposals along with workshops and solicitation of stakeholder comments. Management proposal incorporated additions to address stakeholders' concerns expressed throughout the process. Based on stakeholder feedback, we are making modifications to our meter data submittal monitoring procedures in order to provide additional courtesy warnings ahead of the application of any meter data penalties. We're also clarifying the penalty application of missing meter data penalties to apply to those intervals for which there is a non-zero total expected energy value, eliminating the requirement to submit zeros during settlement intervals in which there was no participation and no expected energy. And lastly, during the stakeholder process, the ISO did take some time, spend some time educating stakeholders per their request as to the details of how these penalties are calculated. And stakeholders appreciated that effort within that process. We can go to the next slide. So in conclusion, management recommends the ISO Board of Governors and WEIM governing body approve the rules of conduct enhancements track 1 proposal. This proposal will ensure meter data penalties for small, long-term meter data inaccuracies are applied proportional to their market impact while continuing to deter non-compliance to the submission of accurate settlement quality meter data The proposal will also improve operational efficiency and is responsive to not only our stakeholders, but also to guidance received by FERC in the response to multiple penalty waiver requests. That is the end of the proposal, and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Jill. Next, we have the Department of Market Monitoring, Ryan Kurlinski, Senior Manager of Market and Policy Analysis. Ryan?
Yes, hey, good afternoon, Chair Leslie, Chair Campbell, governors and governing body members. This is Ryan Kurlinski from the Department of Market Monitoring. Track 1, this initiative mainly evaluated design details of the ISO's penalty structure for inaccurate or late meter data submission. DMM supports the various elements of the ISO's proposed design. First, for inaccurate meter data submission. Charging the lower of $1,000 per day or 30% of the error's value makes sense as an improvement over just charging $1,000 per day. We agree with stakeholders in the ISO that was overly punitive on persistent small errors. And then some stakeholders suggested getting rid of penalties on late meter data submission. In general, if the ISO values timely and inaccurate data submission of any type, DMM supports the ISO establishing or maintaining strict deadlines and also setting appropriately sized financial penalties for not meeting those deadlines. Financial penalties create important incentives for entities to pay attention to meeting the deadlines and to submitting accurate data. So DMM supports the ISO keeping the penalty for late meter data submission. And we look forward to working with the ISO and stakeholders on clarifying deadlines and penalties for other important types of data submission in the upcoming track 2. Thank you for your time. I'd be happy to try to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Ryan. At this point, let's take if there's any comments or questions from the board or the governing body. Severin, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to distinguish what we're doing here from enforcement of fraudulent or intentional misreporting, and ask what the separate rules are for that sort of behavior.
Yeah, I mean, is that addressed to me?
To you or to Jill or to anyone else?
Sure. I mean, I think in general, like, whenever there's the kind of some automated rules that the CAISO may have, and those, those kind of supplement any potential behavioral issues that DMM could refer to to FERC for enforcement action, for fraudulent behavior. So, so I think, from my perspective, I think we view kind of automated rules like this, automatic rules, as kind of enhancing the penalty structure, so that kind of maybe said more minor infractions would get an automatic penalty, and these automatic penalties would hopefully create incentives for entities to follow the rules. But yeah, no, we continue to monitor for intentional fraudulent behavior for meter data submission. Yep.
I did want to add that specific to submission of inaccurate or fraudulent meter data, there are provisions under meter service agreement that does allow for the ISO to suspend the trading rights of these entities who are found to be providing the inaccurate, incorrect, or fraudulent data. So there are other means by which we could, penalize. And then there's just a general tariff requirement of roles and responsibilities of our market participants, that they are providing accurate information, data that would also apply outside of the rules of conduct. And I see Anna may have additional comment.
Thank you.
I have no further comments. Both Ryan and Jill have covered this. I think they've responded.
Great. Thank you, Anna, Jill, Ryan. Any other, I don't see any other hands up, but I don't want to miss anyone. Any other questions or comments from the board or the governing body? Okay, seeing none, hearing none. Next step is to go ahead and seek public comment. And if operator, if you could check the line for public comment.
All right, once again, ladies and gentlemen, if you would like to make a comment, press the raise hand icon at the bottom of your screen. That will enter you into the queue. If you are joined via regular phone audio, pressing #2 will put you into the comment queue. All right, at this time, I do not see any raised hands.
Thank you, operator. At this point, we can go ahead to a motion. And this is a joint motion. So move that the ISO Board of Governors and WEIM governing body approve the rules of conduct enhancements as described in the memorandum dated September 13, 2023, and move that the ISO Board of Governors and WEIM governing body authorize management to make all necessary and appropriate filings with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to implement the change proposed in the memorandum, including any filings that implement the overarching initiative policy but contain discrete revisions to incorporate commission guidance in any initial ruling on the proposed tariff amendment. May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Thank you,
Second.
Governor Borenstein. I'm sorry, who was second?
This is Rob. I'll second.
Okay, somebody came in before you, but we'll take it. Let me go ahead with the vote now. Governor Borenstein, your vote?
Aye.
Chair Campbell?
Aye.
Member Decker?
Aye.
Governor Edo?
Aye.
Governor Galitova?
Aye.
Vice Chair Konzioka?
Aye.
Chair Leslie?
Aye.
Member Prescott?
Aye.
Vice Chair Shori?
Aye.
And Member Wagner?
Aye.
Thank you, board and governing body. The motion passes. Our next item on the agenda item number 5, is our decision on the 2024-2026 cost of service study driven rate and fee changes. And for that, I will turn this over to Ryan Sagazio, our Vice President, Chief Financial Officer, and Treasurer, to introduce the topic.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. We're here today to walk you through the cost of service study results that happened earlier this year. April Gordon, our Director of Financial Planning, will give you a quick summary of the results. The good news is it really has very little impact on our formulaic rates that are in the tariff currently. There's very little change across those categories. We will then kind of shift focus to really discuss 4 elements of our rate design in the tariff that we need or we're suggesting changes to. And April will kind of walk you through each of those, and then we'll open it up for questions. So April, take it away.
All right, thanks, Ryan. Next slide, please. All right, before I begin, I just want to say good afternoon, everyone. That was rude of me for not saying that. So good afternoon. I'll take you through the cost of service study. Just a quick recap of what the study is. It's an ability for us to look at how we are allocating our resources to the different cost category allocations that we have embedded within our GMC rate calculations. Typically, it involves looking at all of the time that our staff reports on their time cards, and then using the tasks that they use along with those hours to determine how much of their time is being allocated to a core grid management charge cost category allocations, such as system operations, market services, and congestion revenue rights. We take a look at that. We finalize the study, and then we use those percentage allocations as well as some other updates to apply to the revenue requirements for those particular years. For example, the last study, we used 49% of market services to apply to the revenue requirement to determine what the amount of the revenue requirement would be necessary to fund market services. So we divide that by the estimated GMC volumes, and that's how we determine the grid management charge rate for market services. Next slide, please.
Some of the steps involved really is maintaining our business processes, knowing from start to finish, build to end, what is involved in supplying those services to our customers. We collect the hours that are processed as part of the time cards. We look at the process and project codes. We look at the task codes. And we take that information and we map out what would be considered direct, such as maintenance on settlement system, versus what would be considered indirect, which could be something as such as providing HR services to the broader organization. Then we calculate that cost category allocation percentage. And then we also reassess the supplemental service charges and fees and rates that we have in other areas. Then for the next three cycles, we use those percentage allocations and those updated rates to apply to the revenue requirement for those years. And that's how we determine the rates that we use for the grid management charges. Next slide, please. Now, for the findings of this cost of service study, there were no changes in the grid management charge cost categories. What I mean by that is the market services allocation remains 49%. That means 49% of our revenue requirement will be used to calculate the market services grid management charge. System operation also remains 49%. And then CRR services will remain 2% as well. The visual that you have in front of you goes over the grid management charge, the WEIM energy imbalance market charge allocations, as well as the reliability coordinator West allocation and some supplemental fees impacted by this study. And then we also show the impacts based off of this study impacting the years in which this is going to be applied, which is 24, 25, and 26. I'm going to go ahead and take you down to the next category, which is going to be the Western Energy Imbalance Market. Here we did see some slight shift. We saw a 1.5% increase in the amount of allocation to the real-time market. And we also saw about an 8% decrease in the real-time dispatch area. Now, in regards to the reliability coordinator funding percentage, here we're seeing a 1% decrease. And then for supplemental fees, we are seeing an increase in our TOR, which is our transmission ownership rights charge per megawatt hour, from 18 cents to 32.5 cents. Now for 24 and 25, all of those will be unchanged. Now going into 2026, we are proposing to bifurcate our system operations charge so that we would have one charge for system operations real-time dispatch and one charge specifically for system operations balancing authority area services. Now, these calculations are already included as part of our front door. Sorry, I have a guest. These calculations are already included in our WEIM calculations. It's just a very simple way to go ahead and show these calculations, so it's very transparent as well to the stakeholders. Now, with that change, I'll go ahead and take you into the next slide.
April, we can't hear you.
Oh, thank you. The ISO is also proposing an EDAM administrative charge transitional load ramping period that will provide for incremental costs for WEIM entities that will be joining the EDAM. The ramping will be offered only during the initial 4 years of EDAM operations. In addition, the ramping will only be applied to those charges paid by load serving entities, not energy suppliers. Now, this will avoid providing any suppliers with a competitive advantage in the market. The ramp-in will increase each calendar year, starting with the charges no less than the WEIM load charges. This ramp-in approach aligns the cost with the benefits as the EDAM benefits are quantified and participation evolves during the accounting for transmission and load served by the ISO balancing authority area and the EDAM entity areas. The ramping approach will support introduction and growth of the EDAM, which will reduce GMC rates for all existing ISO market participants due to the additional supply and demand volumes that are participating in the market starting in year 1. And with that, I'll go ahead and pause to see if there are any questions.
This is John.
I just wanted to ask, April, are you done with your presentation then? Or are you just pausing?
Just pausing.
Okay, so if there are questions at this point, go ahead, governing body or board members. And John, I heard you, so why don't you start?
Okay, thanks. Thank you, April. A question on this slide. Just to be clear, when we look at year 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, these aren't if an entity joined the EDAM in, let's say, the year 2029, that isn't their year 1. Year 1 is when the market actually starts. Is that correct?
That's correct, John. So for example, if EDAM kicks off in 2026, that would be considered year 1.
Okay,
and
thank you.
In 2027, they would only be applicable to the 25% load ramp in.
Okay, thank you.
Next slide, please. Now, in addition to the EDAM transitional load ramp in, the ISO is also proposing to increase the revenue requirement cap, which has remained unchanged since 2015 at the $202 million mark. Now, the ISO will continue to build the revenue requirement as necessary and within the revenue requirement cap, but it is proposing to increase the revenue requirement caps in 25 and 26 to account for not only the normal cost of inflation, operating costs, and additional positions, but also to account for some of the changes of offsetting revenues and adjustments that will be impacted by the rollout of EDAM. The 2025 proposed increase is going to be $245 million, and the proposed increase for 2026 is $250 million. Now, these forecast projections for 25 and 26 were put together prior to the last revision of the cost of service study. But as I mentioned, the ISO will remain diligent in building out the forecast or the revenue requirements as it needs to, not to meet the cap, but to meet the needs. Next slide, please. Now, some of the changes that have happened since the draft final proposal was released it really has to do with EDAM being evaluated for a 2026 inaugural operational year. Now, this change required us to reevaluate the cost of service study results and the proposed changes. Based off of that analysis, we did not foresee there being a big impact, and we are now proposing to level out the real-time market percentage to just be 64.5% over the 3-year period. And then we're also proposing for the transmission ownership rights charge per megawatt hour, which is the TOR rate charge per megawatt hour, to be a flat 32.5 cents per megawatt hour. Now, these changes were reflected in the matrix that you saw in a couple of prior slides. Next slide, please. Now, in addition to the cost of service study items and the EDAM transitional load ramp in and the bifurcation, we're also looking for eliminating some outdated system operations charge exemptions language, as this language is no longer in effect. We rolled this out when we did the last GMC redesign, and the last contract that was eligible for this expired in 2021. Now, with your approval of the proposed changes, we will be making changes to tariff sections 11, section 29, 33, Appendix A, and Appendix F. Next slide, please. We did receive a number of participants in our July and August stakeholder meetings. No objections or concerns were raised regarding the study's results, the proposed bifurcation of the system operations charge, the proposed GMC revenue requirement cap, or the proposed elimination of the outdated language. However, we did receive some stakeholder comments in regards to the EDAM administrative charge transitional load ramp in. The group participants that commented with concerns were the Cal CCA as well as 6 cities. Cal CCA expressed their full support of the EDAM and of the balance authority areas joining the EDAM. However, they believe that the EDAM administrative charge transitional ramp-in model is not necessarily use the costs and benefits of the EDAM. They further opined that the California ISO should instead require all EDAM load, including the California load serving entities and EDAM BAAs, to pay their full GMC upon day one of EDAM. And 6 cities expressed some concerns about whether the model provides just and reasonable rates and reflects an appropriate rate design for ISO entities. They also stated that they understand and support the ISO's objective of encouraging early EDAM participation. However, they felt they had some reservations about whether it was reasonable for the ISO footprint to effectively subsidize the transition period. The ISO's response to both Cal CCA and 6 cities was that the ISO believes that the transitional load ramp-in model is a just and reasonable model for aligning the cost with the benefits of EDAM services that will grow with increased participation. Now, as the EDAM does not initially cover ancillary services or convergence bidding, nor make use of congestion revenue rights, an EDAM entity load will not have the same access to all the services as the California load will. Now, in addition, the incentive of the ramp-in model for early adoption increases the overall benefit for California entities. The ISO believes that since the actual benefits of the EDAM have not been measured or for actual operation, and that the ultimate benefits do not accrue are a function of the number of those participating in the EDAM, the ramp-in model provides for incentives for early adoptions that will best align costs with benefits, while immediately providing benefits to the GMC cost reduction and operational benefits to the existing California customers. Just as with ramping of the WEIM benefits, as it grew, the participation grew, the benefits increased, the ISO believes the same will be for EDAM. Next slide, please. Oh, I apologize. Before I jump off, we did also receive very supportive comments from a few of our stakeholders, specifically Pacific Core Bank, LADWP, and Idaho, all supporting the transitional ramp-in approach. Now, a little bit of where we've been in this cycle. We kicked off the cost of service study back in July. We had a stakeholder meeting in July and in August. We find ourselves here today presenting the study update and the changes to the board and to the governing body. With your approval, we'll go ahead and file the tariff amendments in order to kick off the impacts of the study in the coming revenue requirements. Next slide, please. Now, with your approval, we'll file the necessary tariff amendments with FERC and then adjust the percentage allocations, as well as amend the tariff for the following items: bifurcating the system operations charge, establishing the EDAM administrative charge transitional ramp-in of load volumes during the first 4 years of EDAM operations. We will revise the GMC revenue requirement in 2025 to $245 million, and again in 2026 to $250 million. And we will eliminate the outdated language around system operations charge exemptions. I thank you for your time.
Thank you, April. Let me again ask whether the board or the governing body have any comments or questions for you. I see no hands in the queue. Oh,
Rogers.
I do now. I see it. Chair Campbell, sorry, I had scrolled past you, and then we have Joe Edo after you, so please go ahead.
Got it. Yeah, it's a long list of us. Thank you, April, for the presentation. Just a question. So the revenue requirement cap, can you say a little bit about the significance of that cap, kind of what it is about, and why changing it is important?
Sure. So we've held the revenue requirement at $202 million for many years, as I mentioned earlier, back to 2015. And what that provides for our stakeholders is a guarantee that we will not exceed that 202 mark and then build our rates on that 202 million only. Increasing it to 245 and 250 is really allowing us to restructure the revenue requirement so that when we do roll out EDAM, we're able to recognize the revenue offset that will be no longer above the line as offsets, but be captured as revenue to be collected as RGMC rates. What I mean by that is with the administrative charge, we're proposing that the real-time dispatch will be part of that EDAM transitional or that EDAM administrative charge. Previously, that real-time dispatch was an offset, but when we roll out EDAM, it's going to be collected as a below-the-line item. And that's why we're seeing that revenue requirement having to increase, is because we're going to collect more volumes, or we collect it below the line as part of the additional volumes brought in. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the customers will be paying more. Quite the contrary. When we roll out EDAM, because of the additional day-ahead volumes coming in, as well as the real-time dispatch volumes, with those additional volumes included in our billing determinants, we're going to see those rates actually drop. Does that answer your question, Andrew?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Governor Edo, you have your hand up.
Could you just quickly review the rationale for bifurcating the system operations charge? I understand the total is the same, but just understand why you split it up.
Sure. At the crux of it, bifurcating system operations charge really allows us to be more transparent in how we're building out the real-time dispatch charge element. With that, because we are proposing to include that with our EDAM administrative charge. It's just bringing more transparency to the development of the rates.
Thank you.
Ryan, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just actually was going to add, Andy, on the revenue requirement cap. It came out of a settlement agreement with market participants back in like 2004, where we agreed to build a cap in the tariff, and as long as the annual revenue requirement development did not exceed that cap, then we would not do a 205 filing with FERC that year for our annual revenue requirement. So we typically use the cost of service study to kind of forecast the next several years and then decide where we need that cap to grow to. But it's just been a while since we've had to increase it. So anyway, if that adds anything else.
Okay, Governor Konzi, or Member Konzioka, you had your hand up?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Roger. April, I have a question on the bifurcation. And first of all, I think it's a great idea. Others in the West have done this, and I concur with your previous comments on the ability to have better transparency on where those costs are between the two different areas. But my question is, you noted that the bifurcation charge or that split will not occur until January of 2026. And is there a reason why it's not being done until 2026 as opposed to 2025 or 2024?
Yes, we wanted to align the bifurcation with the kickoff, if you will, of EDAM. As I mentioned earlier, with the EDAM administrative charge that we're proposing, we are no longer going to see those offsets as collection of the real-time dispatch offsets, reducing our revenue requirement. They're actually going to be collected as part of the GMC charges, which are below the line. By aligning the bifurcation of the system operations charge with the proposed kickoff or the potential kickoff of EDAM, if you will, in 2026, that allows us to maintain a reduced revenue requirement for our stakeholders. And then when we do roll out EDAM, then the stakeholders will see an added benefit with the additional volume, so that the impact of that accounting change will not be negative.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Rob. And I don't see any other hands in the queue, so just check again if anyone else has any comments or questions, or we can go to public comment. And seeing none, operator, if you could check the line for anyone with public comment.
All right, I do not see any hands raised at this time, but as a reminder, ladies and gentlemen, pressing the raise hand icon on the bottom of your screen or pressing #2 if you're dialed in will enter you into the comment queue.
Okay, just give a few seconds. Okay, still seeing none. I will go ahead and we can move to a motion. Move that the ISO Board of Governors and the WEIM governing body approve the rate design tariff changes as outlined in the memorandum dated September 13, 2023. Move that the ISO Board of Governors and the WEIM governing body authorize management to make all necessary and appropriate filings with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to implement the proposal described in the memorandum, including any filings that implement overarching initiative policy, but contain discrete revisions to incorporate commission guidance in any initial ruling on the proposed filing. And with that, may I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
That was Joe as a second. And Governor Bornstein, your vote, please.
Aye.
Chair Campbell,
Aye.
Member Decker,
Aye.
Governor Edo,
Aye.
Governor Galitova,
Aye.
Vice Chair Konzioka,
Aye.
Chair Leslie,
Aye.
Member Prescott,
Aye.
Vice Chair Shori,
Aye.
Member Wagner.
Aye.
Thank you, governing body and board. The motion passes. And we can move to our next item, which is agenda item number 6, our decision on variable operations and maintenance cost review. And for that, we have again Anna McKenna, Vice President, Market Design and Analysis, to introduce our topic.
Thank you, Roger. I have the pleasure of introducing Kevin Head, our Senior Market Engineering Specialist, who will be presenting to you the proposal on variable operations and maintenance costs. This is Kevin's first time, so I'd like to welcome him to this community. And Kevin will be walking you through the proposal. And with that, I will transfer this over to Kevin.
Thanks, Anna. Just confirming I'm coming through okay.
Yes, you are.
Great. Chair Leslie, Chair Campbell, members of the WEIM governing body and the ISO Board of Governors, good afternoon. My name is Kevin Head. I'm a Senior Market Engineering Specialist at the ISO in the Market Analysis team. Please move to the next slide. So I'll start with an overview of the proposal. The Variable Operations and Maintenance Cost Review proposes to update the currently effective default Variable Operations and Maintenance, or VOM, adder values. We do this initiative once every 3 years, and that's based on a commitment that that management has made in the business practice manuals. The last review was done in 2020, and that was a much more detailed and comprehensive review of the default values. The 2023 review was much more focused. The last review used 2019 as an inflation reference point, and as you know, inflation rates have been historically high since then. So we're proposing to make an inflation adjustment to the default variable operations and maintenance adder values. So please move to the next slide. So I'll start with a background on what these variable operations and maintenance adder values are. They're really the mechanism through which market participants reflect their O&M costs in the ISO's day-ahead real-time markets. They do that as a component of resources default energy bids and commitment costs. Default energy bids and commitment costs are a reflection of a resource's variable costs to offer energy into the ISO's markets. Default energy bids are used to replace a resource's submitted energy bid if that resource is mitigated during the local market power mitigation process. Commitment costs function a little bit differently. They're bid caps, and they limit how high a market participant can submit their bids for minimum load costs and startup costs. We call those commitment costs. So as I said, VOM adders are just one component of default energy bids and commitment costs. The other components are things like fuel costs, the grid management charge, which Ryan and April were just discussing. There's two ways that a resource can get a VOM adder. First is a predetermined value is assigned automatically to all resources. That predetermined value is determined by the resource's fuel type and technology type. We call that the default VOM adder, and that's what we're proposing to update through this initiative. The second way a resource can get a VOM adder is through the negotiated option. That's used if a market participant finds that the default values are inadequate for their resource. If so, the market participant can approach the ISO with documentation supporting their resource's specific O&M costs and get a VOM adder that's specific and more applicable to their resource's actual costs. We're not proposing to make any changes to any negotiated values or just the process of negotiation. When we're determining the default VOM adder values, there's an inherent tension. On one hand, we don't want to set them too low because they're intended to be used to avoid the need for every resource to have to come in and go through the negotiation process. But on the other hand, we don't want to set the default values too high because that could result in over recovery of costs and potentially inefficient market outcomes. Please move to the next slide. So management's recommending applying an inflation adjustment to those default VOM adders. Specifically, we're recommending an inflation adjustment from December of 2019 to June of 2023. That works out to be about a 19% increase in the values. That increase is based on the change in the consumer price index of the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And we think that'll have two main benefits. First, it will improve the accuracy of the bids submitted by resources that use this default option. And second, it may reduce the need, or may reduce administrative burden by reducing the need to go through the negotiation process that I just previously discussed. So please move to the next slide. We did get some stakeholder feedback on this initiative, which we appreciated. Overall, there was no request to make any adjustments outside of the realm of inflation. But Salt River Project, or SRP, recommended that we use a more recent inflation reference point. So previously we had proposed to use December of 2022. Based on SRP's suggestion, we moved that date a little bit later to June of 2023. SRP also suggested that the ISO perform more frequent reviews of these default values, and second, to use a forecasted measure of inflation rather than a historical measure of inflation to determine the default values. We did not update the proposal based on those suggestions. We feel that the triennial frequency of the cost review remains appropriate, does a good job of balancing the need to make frequent updates to the tariff while still being timely enough to allow for that accurate bid submission. In regards to the use of the forecasted inflation values, we don't think that that is appropriate at this time. There's a lot of uncertainty of what future inflation rates will be, and this is especially because there's not really a clear way of determining how the economy is going to react to the interest rate hikes enacted by the Federal Reserve. And finally, and most importantly, the negotiated option where market participants can approach the ISO directly with documentation that supports their costs. That negotiated option is an available alternative for all market participants if the default values are inadequate. Please move to the next slide. So management's requesting that the ISO Board of Governors and the WEIM governing body approve the variable operations and maintenance cost review proposal. As I explained, we think it'll allow for more accurate cost-based bid submission into the market. And second, it may decrease the administrative burden by avoiding some negotiations. And yeah, that completes my presentation. Thanks for your attention. Happy to take any questions you might have.
Thank you, Kevin. For the governing body and the board, any questions or comments for Kevin? It looks like Rob, you have your hand up.
I do. Thank you. Kevin, I appreciate this presentation and this overview. I think you touched on all the key points. I do have two questions that are strictly clarifications. The first is, I can understand where inflation is on the lower end, where 3 years is a good balance. And I can understand where inflation is high, that 3 years might seem too long. So the first question is there anything that prevents you from accelerating a additional review in the future at some point? Instead of waiting 3 years, could you do an adjustment in 1 year or 2 years, if appropriate, based upon information that you are receiving? And the second question is there any other area that you're monitoring that kind of validates that, you know, if inflation is on the higher end, that you're not, you know, that you have some way of gauging that waiting that 3 years is still appropriate?
Yeah, well, thank you for the questions. I think that they're kind of interrelated. First, the 3 year is sort of a maximum. So we say we'll review them at least every 3 years. When we're making that determination, we consider factors such as inflation, which we did this time, but also how many market participants are coming in to request resource-specific values through the negotiated option. So if we see a lot of those negotiations and the frequency picks up, we can take a step back and say, hey, maybe we need to go take a look at these default values again.
Okay, I appreciate it. So there is a way, based upon if you're seeing a high level of activity in requests for adjustments on the default value, that would give you an indication that maybe it's time to reassess it sooner than 3 years.
That's correct. Yep. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions for Kevin? Seeing none, we can go to public comment. Operator, can you check the queue for public comment, please?
It does look like we have someone in the queue. As a reminder, ladies and gentlemen, pressing the raise hand icon on the Zoom platform will put you into the queue, or #2 if you are on the phone only line. Caller, your line is unmuted. Be sure to click on the pop-up to unmute your line. Deanna, go ahead.
Sorry, I accidentally raised my hand.
Oh, okay.
We're so excited.
No problem.
Doesn't look like there's any other hands up in the queue. Is that correct, operator?
Not at this time.
Okay, well, thank you. I think with that, and with no further questions, we can move to the motion.
Hey, Roger, I think we have some comments from the Department of Market Monitoring on this one.
Oh, did I miss that? Yeah, that was not on my list. I apologize. Okay, well, we can go ahead. Who's comment? Is Ryan commenting?
No.
It's going to be Amelia Blanky. Yes.
Yeah, I apologize. That somehow got missed on my list here. Amelia, please go ahead.
With that, good afternoon, Chair Campbell and Chair Leslie, Board of Governors, and Western Energy Imbalance Market Governing Body members. Thank you for the opportunity to comment on the ISO's proposal before you today. DMM supports this relatively modest update to the default values that are in place for market participants to reflect their operations and maintenance costs appropriately and mitigated reference values. With that, thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions at all.
Questions for Amelia? I see none from the governing body or the board or anyone else in the panel. And let's go ahead and check if there's any public comment at this point or any public questions for Amelia.
It looks like there are no public comments at this time.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Amelia, and sorry for the oversight. And with that, I think we are now ready for a motion. We'll try that again. So move that the ISO Board of Governors and WEIM governing body approve the revision to the variable operations and maintenance cost adders as described in the memorandum dated September 13, 2023, and move that the ISO Board of Governors and the WEIM governing body authorize management to make all necessary and appropriate filings with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to implement the change proposed in this memorandum, including any filings that implement the overarching initiative policy, but contain discrete revisions to incorporate commission guidance in any initial ruling on the proposed tariff amendment. Can I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Thank you, Angelina. Second.
This is Rob. I will second.
Thank you, Rob. Governor Borenstein, your vote, please.
Aye.
Chair Campbell.
Aye.
Member Decker.
Aye.
Governor Edo.
Aye.
Governor Galitova.
Aye.
Vice Chair Konzioka.
Aye.
Chair Leslie.
Aye.
Member Prescott.
Aye.
Vice Chair Shori.
Aye.
And Member Wagner.
Aye.
Thank you. The motion has passed, and we can go to the next item, which is agenda item number 7, and that's the briefing on resource sufficiency evaluation test. And with that, I will turn that over to Eric Hildebrandt, our Executive Director of Market Monitoring. Eric, are you on the line?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Oh, I can hear you now. Thank you.
Okay. All right, I can't see myself, but I assume I'm in the camera here. Okay, good afternoon. Yeah, I'm here to give a briefing on the resource sufficiency evaluation tests. This is an issue that the governing body and board has asked DMM to pay particular attention to and report on to market participants, as well as periodically come back to the board and provide a briefing. So we're here, I think it's been about 6 months. So the next slide, please. Here. So on top here, we do monthly reports, and they're quite detailed and often are quite technical as well. Those are really designed for market participants. There's a lot of specific information for each balancing area there, and the feedback we're getting is they're very valuable for the participants. A lot of the metrics are in there because they did address issues that the participants were interested in. So I gave you a hyperlink there to the most recent report. The charts here, I have a lot of figures in the presentation today, and I'm not really going to go into them. They are a little complicated, but essentially they are illustrations. They support kind of the talking points that I'm making. So they're examples of how we do support or different issues with detailed results in the reports. So I'm going to quickly review the tests for you, go over some recent results, but spend most of my time really just updating you on some changes to the tests that were implemented. The big one was the new quantile regression-based approach for estimating the uncertainty component of the flexible ramping test. That was implemented February 1st, and we've had enough time now to get the data and see how that's working. And then there were 2 other enhancements implemented just on July 1st. And one is an adjustment for lower priority exports from the ISO, and essentially to not count those as a load obligation in the ISO balancing area. And then the other one is the assistance energy transfer program that was implemented that allows any balancing area who opts in access to additional energy through the EIM when they might have failed one of these tests and would otherwise have had their imports limited or frozen. So next slide, please. Briefly, this again, just to refresh your memory, there's 2 tests. The first we call the capacity test, and it's really just, base schedules plus incremental available capacity has to equal or exceed your load forecast plus export base schedules. Next slide, please. Then just a reminder here that over time, we have implemented quite a few things that have improved how we calculate the incremental supply and made that more accurate. I think we've mentioned these over time. There's things like outages, counting D rates and outages correctly, accounting for offline resources that really couldn't start in time, but maybe bid into the market, but couldn't be dispatched in time. Storage resources was another one. Last summer, we were not accounting for the state of charge of battery resources. So there's really been quite a few refinements to how we calculate that. So I just want to make that point, is it has gotten more accurate in that respect. Next slide, please. The second test is the flexible ramping test. That's a bit more complicated, but again, the big difference here is that it includes an uncertainty component. So it's looking ahead at prior to an hour, it's looking ahead, it's dynamic, looking to see, it's counting up ramping capacity. And it's also including an uncertainty component that's highlighted in aqua in this chart. And that really it's designed to capture uncertainty about load and variable resources, so wind and solar. Next slide, please. This, I won't go into this chart, but the headline here is that failures of both the capacity test and the flexibility test have remained relatively low throughout the summer 2023. This is kind of how we summarize all balancing areas going back more than a year, so you can kind of spot trends. Each balancing area can kind of see what's going on, compare themselves to other balancing areas, and over time as well. So both the capacity test and the flexibility test, the failures remain relatively low. Next slide, please. And this one, same information except for the flexibility test. I think you can see there may be a slightly higher rate of failures for the flexibility test. Again, that has that component for uncertainty included in it. Next slide, please. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the quartile regression method that was implemented starting in February. And so the old approach was really a histogram. It was really look back a number of days, and it just took, I think it was the 95th percentile, of the observations, of the net load uncertainty or the variation. The new approach was designed to basically do a regression and be more sophisticated, hopefully be more accurate. So again, it's a statistical regression. The inputs are historical load, solar and wind information going back 180 days. There's a different model for each hour. So it comes up with model estimates based on historical data. Then it takes those coefficients, takes the resulting model, and then each day or each hour it plugs in the load, solar, and wind forecast to try to forecast what the potential uncertainty is of net load. And it does that, it picks the 95th, it estimates the 95th percentile or confidence interval. So it's a much more complicated approach to estimating uncertainty. Next slide, please. Okay, we should be on, okay, slide 9. So just a note, so this regression approach, it can produce, a wide range of results, some of which really fall outside the bounds that, you would consider feasible or that you'd actually want to use. So the ISO has found that it has to put some caps and a floor on what comes out of the regression. So there's two different kind of caps that are established, and these are kind of like just high-end estimates saying, well, it should never be higher than this. And as you can see in this chart, the upper caps do kick in quite a bit. It varies by balancing area, but a fairly high percentage intervals, the regression result is being capped by these upper bounds. Next slide, please. Okay, the next slide shows likewise, there's a floor in a small number of cases, regression can actually give a negative result. So there's a floor of approximately 0 that's set on negative results. Next slide, please. Okay, this next slide is one of the more complicated ones. There's a lot of information packed in here, but there's really kind of two things that it illustrates. And well, the first is that the regression results are really quite variable and much more variable than the old approach. Just to point out, so the old approach, more or less, what the average requirement would be for this balancing area. This is NV energy for the month of July that we just picked as an example. But the green line, which it's a line, and you can see the range is quite narrow. That's essentially similar to the old approach, the histogram approach, but the light blue area, that's how widely the regression approach ranges. That's the high and the low of the regression-based approach for those same hours of that same month. So the first takeaway is it really varies widely. And in some cases, we have seen some areas, some hours, the regression result can be a little lower than the other one. So they can have a lower requirement in some cases, but much higher variability. And so I think this highlights the big trade-off that we're seeing. So, we are doing some more detailed analysis on this, but so far, it does, I think we are questioning whether the additional complexity of this approach outweighs kind of the variability of it and the lower transparency for participants. The variability can affect participants because it can make it more difficult for them to plan ahead of time and know how much capacity they want to commit and have ready to meet the requirements. Because again, with the new approach, they are, getting that shortly before the start of the next operating hour based on the most recent wind and load and solar forecasts. Next slide, please. Okay, then moving then to the second big change that was implemented, and this was to account or to change the way that low priority exports from the California ISO balancing area are treated. Before they were essentially treated as a load obligation in the capacity and the flexibility tests. However, since those are low priority exports and economic exports, they can be curtailed. A refinement was put in to essentially cancel out the impact and not count those as additional demand in these tests. As you can see there, that the quantity actually can be quite significant, 1 to 2,000 megawatts, I think, in this chart. Sorry, go to the next chart, if you could, please. So this shows the magnitude of some of those exports in the capacity test. And so while the quantity of this is quite significant, we did look back and find that on the margin, this incremental change had no impact on the capacity test. So it didn't prevent the ISO from failing the capacity test in any case since it's been implemented. And it only impacted the flexibility test during 4 15-minute intervals or 1 hour in August. So even though it's a significant quantity on the margin by itself, it really only prevented the flexibility test from failing for 1 hour this year. Next slide, please. Again, similar slide, just shows detail on the magnitude that this change had on the flexible ramping requirements. Next slide, please. Okay, my final issue or the final item change here then is the Assistance Energy Transfer program or option. BAs can opt into this. And if they do, they can access additional supply through the EIM that may not have been available otherwise following a failure of either of the capacity or the flexible ramping tests. So if an area opts into it, instead of being limited, they can import additional power, but they are then charged an ex post surcharge for that. The surge charge, as you recall, can be substantial, the $1,000 or $2,000 bid cap. We're not reporting on this because the decision about whether or not balancing areas opt into this is not public yet. The ISO does inform all the balancing areas of the areas that have opted in. I get the logic there, I guess, is, each balancing area needs to know, or it's beneficial for reliability to know which other areas have opted in. However, it's not clear that that's public information. The ISO does post its status publicly on its website. So this is an issue we flagged for the ISO policy makers is, we think they should clarify, if the information is being provided to the balancing areas, they should probably clarify whether the extent to which that information could be used or disseminated. And then if it's public information, let's just, put it on the website so the public can have it. But until that information is public, we're not going to be doing reporting on the assistance energy transfers. Next slide, please. So while we can't report on the impact of this, we have included some information in our most recent report that helps participants understand whether or not their balancing area would benefit from this. So we've just created some empirical examples. On the left is a scenario where if an area fails the test, but its imports are below the level at which they would have been capped, then there's really no impact of opting in terms of accessing additional supply. So that's one scenario. We do point out there that even though they may not get additional supply in this scenario, they are subject to the surcharge for the amount by which they are importing through WEIM. Then there's the other scenario, the one the program was really designed to address is, an area fails the test, it's able to import more power as a result of opting in, and all of those imports, the additional imports as well as the regular imports are all subject to the charge. So we do point out the two different scenarios, and then the final slide, please, if you go to that. We do provide some metrics in terms of how often this the constraint is binding when areas fail the test. So again, areas I think can take this information and kind of better assess and understand the implications of their area should they opt in or opt out of the program. So that wraps it up for me. I'm glad to answer any questions or double back and explain anything I may have gone over a little too quickly.
Thank you, Eric. Is there any questions from the governing body or the board for Eric? We start with Member Wagner, Rebecca.
Thank you, Eric, for the presentation. I'm the newbie here, and this is complicated, and I'm learning a lot. So thank you for doing this. I have to say the red flag came up with respect to publicly available information, and was just curious of what's the basis of wanting to keep it confidential, or can you add any color around that? Because it just obviously that jumped out.
We've teed that up for the ISO. I can't provide any information. I'm guessing it was a decision, to err on the side of not. If you're not sure it's public, they weren't going to. I guess they decided not to put it on Oasis. We don't think it was an explicit policy decision. So that's why we flagged it for the ISO as something that, you know, let's clarify it and kind of either it's confidential and define that, or it's public and let's get it out there for everybody to have the same information.
Thanks for that.
Governor Bornstein?
Yeah, I'm trying to think through this quantile regression versus the sort of simpler approach. And it definitely worries me that it seems the quantile regression seems to sort of generate unrealistic results at times that we're sort of boxing in. I guess it would be useful to first do some sort of backcasting to see how well each performs in some metric, and it's not obvious, but also I mean, there is a basic test of predicting distributions of how often the outcome falls outside whatever the 95th percentile, 95% confidence, and if it falls outside 20% of the time, it's not doing a great job predicting. So it seems like making sure we're not doing something that may be more sophisticated but has some glitch in it is pretty important here.
Yeah. Yeah, no, your point is a good one. So we are working on a more detailed report. We actually have a lot of that, exactly that kind of analysis, since it does get into some even more hardcore statistics and econometrics. We are circulating a draft. We want to let the ISO and the MSC review that carefully before we come up with that. But we're going to have a standalone report that I think gets to those kind of tests that you're referring to, exactly, statistical tests on the performance, and is it a significant improvement compared to the other one.
And I just had one other question, which is, I was looking at these test failure matrices, and these are percent of all 15-minute intervals, right?
Yes.
So like 3% doesn't seem that low, actually, when you think of it that way, because 90% of all intervals, you would think we're not going to be anywhere near. I mean, there's no issue at all. So
yeah,
is 3 or in one case 5% really that low?
Yeah. So I was making a generalization. So yeah, you're zeroing in. I guess I'm they're color coded. So we do color code the ones. So there are some individual balancing areas for individual months, particularly where depending on your definition of low, you know, maybe it's a bit higher. And again, yeah, and I would note most of these, oftentimes they are clustered in the more critical net peak hours.
I would think
so. We have reported in other reports, you know, on which hours these are occurring. So yeah, overall they're low, but you're right, for some individual areas, it's been somewhat higher.
Thanks.
And again, you know, the point of these charts is, okay, it's all out there, you know, every balancing area can see, you know, the results of the other balancing area. They can, you know, there are issues, you know, behind, you know, if there's flare-ups, there are very specific explanation or issues sometimes that drive the results.
Okay, thank you. Vice Chair Conzioka, you have your hand up.
Thank you. Eric, I appreciate DMM preparing this presentation material and your time to go through it and to help educate us and better understand what is going on with resource efficiency evaluation. As I look at this material, and as you noted in the beginning, the reports, those reports are not easy to go through and understand and have takeaways. You are spot on in stating that this is very complex and hard to understand. And and I understand that you're presenting to us from DMM's evaluation. But as we look at this journey that RSC has taken, I'm not so certain that we've been able to necessarily move it in the right direction. You know, we really wanted to have a tool so that all of the participants in the EIM can make certain as they enter the 15-minute market that they are resource sufficient. And if they aren't, they understand how short they are and what they need to adjust. And I'm not so certain that that's where we've ended up. I'm not certain we've made it simpler. I think it's more complex, and I don't know that it's even more accurate. You know, maybe we need to give this more time. You know, I'd appreciate your thoughts on, are we moving this in the right direction, or is this something that we need to continue to have more focus and feedback on, and determine that either yes, we are moving in the right direction, or two, we need to make some additional corrections to make it a more viable, useful tool.
Yeah. So on one hand, I think I did note the accuracy of the test has been improved, so that's good. There has been progress made on that front. I think our sense initially was that we were a little skeptical of the new regression-based approach. You know, I don't want to get ahead of the report that we're you know, having draft form, but you know, it does seem, you know, very complicated with questionable, if any, increase in accuracy. So I think we have a long-standing kind of preference or suggestion that stakeholders consider just a simpler, more transparent value. And we think the level of that value, too, we think it's kind of a margin that everybody agrees on. You know, I think we kind of think there's a false sense of what you're measuring here. There's a false sense of precision, you know, when you say we're doing this with 95%, you know, confidence. So we think, no, the whole idea of the test should be relooked at and consider something simpler that all participants feel is, you know, fair for everybody to bring to the table. I think we can rule out, you know, remember one policy issue was whether or not the uncertainty requirement should be in the capacity test. That was taken out. So, you know, definitely we would not recommend putting that back in based on the new approach. You know, at one point there was thinking, well, if this new approach, you know, let's get that implemented and then revisit whether we should put the flexibility or the uncertainty component back in the capacity test. So I think we definitely don't see that happening based on the regression-based approach. And I think the energy assistant transfers, there was a recognition that that was really just an interim thing to get in for the summer until something else was developed. I think there was general agreement that the consequences of failing the test should be revisited as well. You know, again, the energy assistant transfer is optional. So if there was no change in the consequence, you know, if the entity did not opt in. So I forget, but I think there is a next phase of this. I think, I don't recall the timing, but I know that this is slated, you know, for an additional phase. I think the idea was to get these changes implemented and then revisit it.
Yeah, you're correct. There is another phase, and I'm just wondering if we need to incorporate some of these learnings here into this forward look, and which makes that maybe expand a little bit. Or, you know, again, I would ask, are we moving this in the right direction, and are we getting the results we want? And are entities that are participating in the EIM improving their performance because of this?
Yeah.
So, and again, you're doing the evaluation. That's not to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm kind of questioning out loud, trying to understand this better.
Yeah, no, I mean, our hope is this kind of analysis feeds into the stakeholder process. And, you know, the answer to a lot of these questions, you know, we think it is, you know, it's a matter of consensus, building consensus, and what all the different balancing areas agree to is fair for everybody. So I think to some degree, it's more of a policy decision more than a, you know, an economic or statistical question.
Fair enough. Thank you, Eric. I appreciate that.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you, Rob. Anita, you have your hand up?
I do. So recall that we asked Eric to take on this work based on stakeholder comments. And it hasn't even been a year. And they've continued to make improvements. And not that it can't continue to be improvements, but I think whether stakeholders embrace the information and use it is really up to stakeholders. And if there's other refinements that they want to see to help them manage, I think those are things that DMM should be working with stakeholders to secure. The stakeholders really have to determine whether this information is of value to them. And I think that's something DMM should be working with stakeholders to, is this of value? What are the attributes should be looked at, and continue on this journey of, it's really continuous improvement. You know, we started in one place, they've added some things, it's gotten more refined, and it is complex. But I think you've got to kind of, you know, turn the soil over for a while before you start backing off too much. So I really want to applaud the work of DMM. This was not work they had. They took it on. They're doing a good job with it. The feedback I've heard from stakeholders has been positive, and they're paying attention to it. So I think those are all positive things along this journey of how do we look at RSC? How do our stakeholders look at RSC? And getting through does it have value? How do you measure it? How do you assess it? How do you use it? So Eric, I just want to give your team lots of kudos. And again, not that there's still not other refinements and improvements, but where you are in this journey, I think is really pretty remarkable.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. And then we do, you know, the reports, we do focus on really just transparency. We don't put a lot of policy recommendations, you know, in the reports. And I think it is building a foundation, you know, for the next round of stakeholder the initiative. I think participants will have a much better understanding of how the tests work, the details, and I think that it'll improve the policy discussion of any changes.
Okay, Mark, you have your hand up.
No, I would just want to add to the discussion here. One, I really do appreciate DMM's analysis and review. I think it largely aligns with what we're seeing and what we're experiencing from the ISO perspective. We're continuing to do some analysis as well, and I would put this in context. The overall RSC improvements were known to be incremental. The overall test was viewed as an important element to the WEIM, and I think putting them in the right light in terms of refinements is appropriate. I don't think we were expecting to get major shifts in performance out of this. And even on the quantile regression, some of the motivation was more to address some of the bookend observations where you'd expect renewables either at very low operation to have one observation of uncertainty, and at the very high end, a different extreme of uncertainty. And really, it's that middle area where we weren't expecting to get improvements. We were expecting to get more improvements at the bookends. So overall, I think for the time that's been in there, I think we're still learning. I think it's giving us new data points, and I think it will feed in very appropriately into our continuing efforts to further refine RSE. At some point, we may find that we refined it as far as we can go and far as is reasonable. And I think this data will help inform whether we hit that point or not. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Seeing no more comments or questions in the queue from the panel, we'll check now for public comment online. Operator, I don't see any now, but if you could repeat our instructions, and let's see if we have any public comment.
Roger, this is Anita, and my hand's not raising. I would like to make a comment that maybe in 6 more months, Eric, bring it back, and then we get kind of another update on this, because this is worth watching it from my perspective.
Okay, yep, absolutely.
Thank you, Anita. It did show up eventually, and I'm sorry I missed that. Okay, operator.
All right. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, if you would like to make a comment, please click on the raise hand icon on the bottom of your screen. Or if you are connected to today's meeting via phone audio, pressing #2 will enter you into the comment queue. All right. I do not see any raised hands at this time.
Thank you, operator. Thank you, governing body and board. The next item on the agenda, number 8, is informational reports. And that is, we had 2 that were submitted: market performance update, policy initiative update. And this is the time, if you have any questions on the informational reports, to raise those. But otherwise, they are just for your information. Seeing no questions, or no hands, I should say, we can adjourn our joint general session. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Roger.
Thank you, Roger.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everyone.
everybody. Appreciate
Thank you,
it.
everyone.
Stay safe. Thanks.
Bye.
Everybody.
Yeah.
Bye. Bye.
That concludes our conference. Thank you for using event services. You may now disconnect.